This is Product by Design, a podcast by Prodigy, where we explore technology, artificial intelligence, user experience, product management, and the philosophy of building products and companies. Welcome to another episode of Product by Design. I am Kyle, and this week we've got another awesome guest with us, Dan LaCivita. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks for having me, Kyle. Good to be with you today.
Yeah, super excited to talk with you, Dan. Let me do a brief intro, and then you can tell us a little bit more about yourself. But Dan is the co-founder of Play, which is transforming how teams create mobile products by empowering them to design, build, and experience their product in real time, all on the medium that they're designing for, which is their phone, which I'm excited to talk more about. But Dan is also an entrepreneur and servant leader who has built and grown and led successful teams and businesses for over 20 years. So, Dan, again, it's awesome to have you on the show. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. And thanks again. And thanks for the intro. As you mentioned, one of the four co-founders of Play. So founded Play about 4 years ago, actually now, with my co-founders, June, Eric, and Michael. We've all been working together for about 16 years now, actually. I've been saying 15 years, but I realize I've been saying that for the last few years. So you need to add years on top of that. Like 16, 17 years now, we've been working together. Prior to starting Play, we were building a design and technology agency called Firstborn, along with a lot of other very talented people. Firstborn was founded in 1997, actually, by Michael. And then June and I came on board in the early 2000s. I started as a Flash developer, not a very good one, as June will tell you, and as some other people will tell you. But I loved the design and the development side of product design. And kind of as I started as a Flash developer, became a project manager and a producer, and then just had the opportunity to, along with our other teammates, grow and build Firstborn as an agency and as a great agency. I think doing some great work. We were acquired by Dentsu about 11 years ago. And so we were there for actually June and myself there for 8 years post-acquisition until we left to found Play with Michael and Eric. So yeah, that's a bit about me. I live in Connecticut right now. Spent the last 15 years living in New York City, but moved to Connecticut a couple of years ago with my wife and our two boys. Still going to the city every week. We have an office there, so it's nice to get back into the city and get with the rest of at least our New York-based team on a weekly basis.
Well, it's a really, really interesting background, and I'm excited to talk a little bit more about that. But before we dive into it, tell us a little bit more. What else do you like to do outside of the office?
So, as I mentioned, I have two kids with my wife, two young boys, 8 and 10. They keep us pretty busy. So, being, startup life, you're working a lot. So the boundaries between life and work tend to get a little blurry, which is okay. It's part of the part of the journey, but spend as much time, with our kids as possible. A lot of sports right now. So that's fun. Exercise, since I moved back, I love to cook, as well. Pretty simple. My life is pretty simple these days, actually, which is by design, and something that I actually like. I think probably the biggest thing outside of work, hobby / volunteer work. I'm a volunteer firefighter for our town. Something that I've kind of always wanted to do, but never thought I would be able to do. And when we moved back here a few years ago, our fire service is 100% volunteer. A lot of people don't realize unless you live in a big city, your fire service is probably also partially or fully volunteer. And so I've been doing that for the last couple of years when I can and when I have time. And I love it. It uses a very different part of my brain than, but a lot of analogs to what we do actually in kind of building teams. And so yeah, that's kind of my hobby / extracurricular activity right now.
That sounds exciting and really, really interesting. We may have to dive into that a little bit more as we talk about teams and some of the other things that we'll discuss. But I'm excited to kind of dive into some of the things that you've brought up and that you've talked about or touched on, especially your journey. You touched on it a little bit about as you built this agency, which eventually got acquired, and then you went on to found the company that you're at right now, Play, with a few of the other people that you've been working with. I guess, what was that transition like as you were looking at founding a new company, going out and really starting something again? What was kind of the impetus for that, and what ultimately kind of made you take that leap into starting something again?
Yeah, I think it was so definitely a transition going from. So Firstborn was an agency, and agencies are service businesses, right? Which is different than building a software company in many ways. So I think going from, and I can talk about a few of the maybe transitions from going from a business where, from day one, I would say the business fundamentals like revenue and your cost basis and your profit margin are kind of important. Not to say that those things are not important now, but when you're building a venture-backed business, as we are, the earlier days, you're not focused on being profitable from day one. I think profitability probably within the last 18 months is taking on a different complexion for companies, and I think that's a good thing for venture-backed companies. It's a good thing bringing some of those business fundamentals back into the equation is probably very important. Or I think is very important. So those were wrapping my head around that in the early days where you're just, I would sort of joke around with our early investors being like, I'm used to running a $30 million P&L. We're doing, $30 million in revenue at Firstborn, to now I'm just running an L, like we're just paying people and like, we're not making any money. There's a different mental shift that has to happen there in the early days. And so that was one thing for me personally that was a little bit different. But really the impetus was, ultimately it was June in many ways. June is like the visionary behind Play. It was his vision around what does the future of design software look like? And we've decided to start with designing mobile products and using the mobile phone, which is the medium you're designing for, as an input device in that design process. And I can talk a little bit about the product later on. We're building out our desktop product right now. And I think we are at especially certainly with AI now, right? We're at a shift for all software. And we'll continue to see that evolution over the course of the next, 5 to 10 years. And it's probably going to happen pretty quickly. It's going to be exciting and scary and challenging and all those good things. But I think the impetus for me was wanting to do something really challenging again with people that I love to work with that also challenge me. And so Firstborn was an incredible journey. I was there for 15 years. And I was there that was like my career. I was there basically 2 years after I graduated college. I started working at Firstborn, and it was such an incredible journey. Being able to build something with people that were, super talented, very hardworking. We were all at like similar life stages, and we were just figuring it out together. And so being able to start over and do that again, it was either that or like career corporate executive. That was, to boil it all down, that was the choice. And I think, and that's not an easy choice, when you're married and you have kids and mortgage and all that stuff. But I was like, if I don't do it now, I'm never going to do it. So like, let's do it. And I think, June had this idea. And so it was just, we went out to dinner one night. He's like, so I'm doing this, like, whether you do this or not, I'm doing this. And I'd love to have you join and we do it together. And I was like, all right, let's go. So that's kind of that's the story.
That's awesome. So diving into that a little bit more, tell us more about, maybe the problem that you were seeing and that, June was seeing as far as mobile design software, and, what Play originally was, and, how you went about identifying that problem, understanding it, and then, really starting to build Play and what that has eventually become. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but what was that process like, and where are you now?
So we were using Sketch. This is like pre-Figma days, or very early Figma days. We're using Sketch and then using Figma, of course, in their early days before kind of their meteoric rise, which is an incredible tool. We still use Figma, today, although we're using Play more to design Play, which is kind of fun. And so I think it was interesting because like I had a perspective after June, kind of came up with this initial vision, which was basically when we're designing for the phone, we rarely interact with the phone. Like we rarely interact with the actual medium that we're designing for. Like we're designing on our desktops and we're designing with materials that aren't actually the materials of the medium that we're designing for. Again, and not to take away anything from what we call sort of traditional or general purpose design tools, because there's absolutely a need to just put pixels on a screen, right? But they're they're rectangles on the screen. And so they are pictures of the thing. They aren't the thing. And so they're representations of the thing. They're not the real thing. They're blueprints, right? A lot of different metaphors that we can use for that. And so I think for June, it started as he's like, when I'm designing for mobile, I have to, I design in this little cutout frame, in my desktop tool. And then I have to use a pretty crappy mirror app. And honestly, mirror apps still today are generally not great. With all this time that we've had to make them great, still not great. And so I'm looking at my mirror app. And then when I want to change something, I can't. Like because like in that moment when I see it on my phone, that's when I either experience an interaction or I want to make a design change. And he was like, it would be awesome if I could just do it directly on the device. And it was so when he started to prototype these things, originally I thought it was crazy. I was like, we're not going to be able to build a tool on the phone. I was like, you're nuts. And he started to do, prototyping in the early days. And we always knew that desktop would play a role. And I could come back to that because that's what we're building now. But by starting with the phone, it forced us to fundamentally think different about the tool that we were building, as opposed to starting with the desktop from both a technical perspective as well as from a workflow perspective. And we learned a lot by starting with the phone. And I think at the same time, looking at the market of design software, if I could sort of put it in a nutshell, I think traditional design tools, or what Figma really solved for and did so brilliantly, was how designers work. Because if you think about before Figma, we're using abstract or other version control things for sketch files, Dropbox _final. Right? We're sending these files. Figma comes along and it's like, well, there's no more files. And so they fundamentally changed and solved for the problem of how designers work, right? Real-time collaboration, transparency throughout the rest of the product team and organization. And I think, but that's table stakes now. Right? You're not going to go back to using a tool where you're sending design files over Dropbox, I don't think, right? So that's table stakes. So the question is, well, what's next? And the next frontier, we believe, is going to be solving for what designers make. Because if you think about it, up to this point, design software that we've all used hasn't really considered the medium we're designing for or the materials of that medium in a way that other software, I think, considers their medium, right? If you look at video editing software, other things like this. So with Play, that's a fundamental cornerstone, right? We're not trying to build a new general purpose design tool. The cornerstone of what we're building is to give product designers access to that native environment, native iOS elements, real gestures for interactions. So you're not trying to use web technologies to simulate what a pan gesture feels like, because it's never going to feel the same. It just isn't. Right. And so when you're designing in Play, you're designing inside of the native environment with those real materials. And so that lets a designer build with the same things that an engineer is going to use to ultimately build that product. So there's now a common language that's spoken there. And it opens up many other doors that we're sort of discovering as we're building our macOS desktop product, like being able to generate Swift UI code in real time based on what you're designing and having that change based on what you're designing. So I think if I were to sum up Play, it's almost like you took Figma and a really high fidelity prototyping tool like a Protopie or Origami and Swift UI. And they kind of came together to create a new sort of evolution of what a design tool, what design software could be like, focusing on the mobile product first. We're not going to stop there, but that's where we're starting.
I think it's incredibly exciting because you've touched on a couple of pain points that I know I have felt many, many times, not even as a designer, being on the product management side and working closely with design, whether it's doing, the rough prototypes or, trying to demo some things, that the mobile experience, even though we always are trying to prioritize it, and that's even more important now, has always been one of the things that is secondary. And, being able to demo mobile prototypes, being able to actually see those types of things, being able to just get on a meeting and show what it looks like it's incredibly difficult. And so the idea of shifting that to, we're building in a lot of times mobile first. And now this is with Play, you've taken that to, we're not just designing mobile first, but we're like putting design into a mobile first mentality and putting the tools there so that is not just you're designing mobile first, but mobile is the core of it. And to me, that's so exciting because that's become such an important part of everything that we're building. If it doesn't work well there, it's where people mostly are. It's just not going to work for many, many users and a growing number of users in a lot of cases. As you've done this and as you've started to solve this problem that you were experiencing and many others, what have you seen with companies or users, and what has been, I guess, some of the initial things that you've learned as you've started to kind of take this shift with the way that you're designing, and as you've seen other people start to use Play and start to really design mobile first, I guess?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we saw in the early days were things that we knew or maybe had hypotheses around, but it accelerated those things. And we learned a lot of new things too. I think when you're building a product, especially a complex one, it's so easy to get hyper focused to the point where you have tunnel vision, and to a degree that's necessary, right? For certain members on the team, because we're solving such complex things, you have to be focused on what you're solving for. But then, especially when you're solving complex problems for users, the solution needs to be as simple as possible for them as well, right? Even when it comes to things like layout, right? Like our layout engine is, if you're a designer that understands Flexbox or CSS, or you use auto layout in Figma, our layout engine is the same. I mean, it's virtually the same. But I was astonished at how many product designers don't use auto layout in Figma or don't even know what it is, like kind of senior product designers, and I get it. Like if you're, and I'm not a designer by trade, but like when I'm building something in Figma, or certainly when I'm building something in Play, like I'm designing an auto layout, by default because it's faster and it's just better. Like I don't want to put everything in an absolute position, even if I'm just starting to design. I understand people want to do that. We've actually just rolled out sort of like a free form stack in our Mac OS product today, actually, which is based on Z stacks and Swift UI. So it's actually kind of cool because we're basing it off of Z stacks and Swift UI, but it allows you to kind of move things and place them in an absolute position. They're technically on like the Z axis, but that's a bit of a tangent. But I was really surprised at the learning curve of the layout system when we thought that we were basing it off of something that so many people would already know and understand. And I think tools like Figma have done an excellent job in easing that learning curve for the community as a whole. And that will be the standard, right? If you're building real products, to lay them out in a way that isn't placing everything in an absolute position. But that was a big learning. Meeting designers where they already are working within was also a big learning, right? So we accelerated our Figma import feature very early on our roadmap because of user feedback. Again, something that we were going to do, but just that early feedback, they were like, listen, I just rebuilt my whole design system in Figma, like from scratch. I'm not doing it again. So like, I got to get this stuff inside of your tool. So we built a really robust Figma import feature, which is currently available in our iOS and iPad products that are in the App Store. And we're incorporating that into the Mac OS product, but also trying to make it better. It's pretty robust right now. It's something that it's not perfect, but it's something that we're proud of. Like if you're designing in Figma and you're using auto layout, when you import those component, let's say if you import your component library into Play, we'll respect all of those auto layout constraints. We'll convert it to stacks inside of Play, which then gives us the ability to generate that Swift UI code as well. So you can take that code, paste it in Xcode, and it's going to render those same views with all those same properties and those same constraints, which is kind of cool. But there's been a lot of changes that Figma has done, which are great, like variants. So it's like, okay, well, how do we think about variants when we're importing? Those are similar to states in Play, but they're not really states. So there's a lot of complexity. And then I think the last thing I would say is just like feedback led us to accelerating our desktop product. We always knew we'd build a desktop product, but I think when we launch our desktop product, just being able to, and so you're going to be able to design across macOS and iOS in real time. And so anything that you're designing in macOS, and if you click on it and select it, it appears on your iOS device. It's not a mirror app. We are redrawing and re-rendering everything on the device, and everything is interactive. And you could just take your device and then go and tweak stuff on your phone, or you can design in Mac OS. So it's quite a magical experience. And I'm really excited to, get more people onboarded in the coming months.
That sounds really, really exciting. What do you see, I guess, as where does this go next for you? Obviously, being able to design on desktop was a big part of that. What are some of the next things that either you're seeing users or designers do, or even like industry changes or movements that are happening that you kind of see upcoming?
Yeah, I think near-term focus is getting our macOS product really performant, really stable. It's already performant, it's already stable, but really getting this to be a product that people would use in their day-to-day workflow, right? Where it would be a trusted tool, and where it will have enough feature parity with a design tool that they're familiar with, like Figma, where they feel like they can design anything that they want, but we bring in the prototyping and interactive capabilities that are far superior to other design tools out there, and the native sort of library, if you will, of iOS. That becomes, again, if you're designing a website, Play is not really all that relevant to you today, right? You can design it in Figma, but maybe you want to build it in Webflow, or maybe you want to build it in Framer, right? So you actually get a website at the end of it. But if you're building a mobile product, we're building Play to be the best tool for that job. And so it's like if you're designing a new mobile app, or if you're iterating on an existing mobile app, we are building Play for you. And we want you to give us feedback in terms of what it is that you want, right? So we've got, senior designers at Airbnb. It's like they want conditional logic and variables and more complexity, more sophistication, right? So it's balancing things like that with, okay, how do we make the layout system as easy as possible for like newer users? Those are kind of like two opposing forces in some ways, and it's our job to reconcile them. And we have a limited, we're a pretty small team. There's only so many hours in the day and so many people. And so that's the balance. But I think the short answer to your question is leaving enough room in the roadmap that is quite honestly undefined. We have so many things we want to build, but we need to listen to our users and figure out what their priorities are and how do we deliver on their needs in the near term. And then obviously the big question mark is, what role does AI play in all of the software that we're all building? We certainly are thinking about it here. I don't think we want to rush anything to deliver something that's like flash in the pan. It's got to be utilitarian. I think it's got to have this moment of like utility and magic. And when those two things come together, it's like, wow, that made this awesome. My partner June the other day was talking about video editing software. And he was like, and I forget the name of the software, but let's say you're doing a podcast or you're doing an interview and you've got 3 cameras, right? And so like now you've got to sit there and edit that whole thing with those 3 cameras. Like there's tools now, you just like put in those video stream. It's just going to edit it all for you. And it's probably going to be better than what an editor can do. That's utilitarian and it's magic. It's like, wow, that's amazing. That literally just cut 8 hours of my time. So I think we need to have that mentality. We're going to see a lot of AI stuff that's just, I don't know, glorified search, kind of like queries and stuff like that. But there are going to be really disruptive and really useful applications of it. And I think that's what we're thinking about for our product in the long term.
It's been incredible to see, kind of like you mentioned, some of the things that are starting to happen on that front and where it will go. Kind of like you said, not necessarily everything is going to be valuable, but the places where it is incredibly valuable, where it's taking, I know for a lot of the things that I'm doing, like where AI is taking a lot of the tasks that were taking a long time and we're not maybe incredibly value add and are making them much shorter and oftentimes doing them just as well or better than, I could do. Like that to me, kind of like you said, is that magical thing of like, yes, this is what I needed to do and is helping in an incredible way. It's not, a flashy thing that, not always a flashy thing that, it's just, hey, this is cool, but there's not a ton of value. But like, where is that valuable thing that is going to make my job easier and ultimately allow me to focus on the things that are the most valuable for me to be focusing on? And that's, like you said, that's an exciting space to really be thinking about and to be developing in. I wanted to kind of dive into, something else you touched on, the idea of kind of balancing the simplicity and complexity. Because I feel like this is an ongoing challenge in most apps and in most things that we develop, and something that I feel like I'm constantly looking at, especially as you get power users coming in who really understand a product, understand how to do things really well, balancing, the tools that they need with, really the simplicity of what, makes a product really easy to use and really easy to start. How have you been approaching that? Obviously, there are trade-offs and all of that, but what do you think about that? How have you been, working with users and customers to approach some of that and finding the right balance of that powerful complexity, but also the ease of use simplicity?
Yeah, it's super challenging, man, in a good way. I think so. When talking with our users, first of all, any feedback from any user is obviously important to listen to. How you use that feedback to influence the changes you make in your product is something that needs to be thought carefully about, right? So, I think when we, there are certain things where it's like, if you ask 5 people who you believe, 5 users who you believe to be your ICP, and like they're all confused about X, then X is confusing, right? You don't need to ask 5 more. I mean, you could, but you're probably going to get the same answers. So I think that, like, for us is like where lots of different types of people are using Play, right? Some people are using Play inside of larger organizations that have an existing app. They're using it maybe for more advanced prototyping and things like that. Other teams are maybe designing and building their first app. So we want both of them as a customer and as a user, but the use case is slightly different. Therefore, the features that they may prioritize or what's most important to them may be slightly different. So there's that kind of differential. And then there's also the where is that person in their career? Like how technical a user are they? Are they a designer that's more of a visual designer, or are they a designer that dabbles in Swift UI or in some coding, right, on the side? A tool like Play probably feels more at home for the latter of those two users. So anytime we get feedback from users, one of the things that I'm trying to do is like, okay, this is all valuable, but is the person or is the people where this feedback is coming from, do they fit within who we believe our ICP to be, right? Our core like customer. And if the answer is yes, well, that's good, because then that is directional feedback that we'll dig deeper in, and then that will usually influence the changes that we make in the product pretty significantly. But what's more interesting is like there's maybe a group of people that are a slight tangent of our ICP. Then the question is like, okay, well, do we have the right ICP? Like, or is there another market here that maybe we should be thinking about? And if we build for that market, does it take away from? So those are the fun, kind of spirited debates and conversations that you have, as a product team. It's all part of the journey. I think the other thing too is like balancing wanting to stick to some best practices around like the interface. What should the interface of a design tool look like, with also trying to make things better. And like when you try to make something better, it's also different, and sometimes different equals I don't like it at first, right? And so it's trying to figure out, well, okay, well, do you not like this because it's just not in the same place as you're used to? But does it give you more value? So trying to decipher that kind of feedback as well. So that's all. That's kind of where we're at in the Mac OS journey too, because we're trying a lot of new things that we think could be useful or interesting or have a magical kind of moment. And sometimes people are like, "Oh, this is awesome," and other times they're like, I kind of just like the old way, like just do it how I'm used to, And so try to balance those things out.
I totally agree with that. I think that it is, obviously getting all of those data points is incredibly important, wherever it comes from, and then finding where it fits within your overall strategy and where you are now and where you want to go. So, does it align with the segments and the customers you're serving and the ones that you potentially want to be serving at some point, which is, like you said, an exciting thing to constantly be debating and thinking about, like directionally where you go. I think that's great. I want to kind of zoom out just a little bit too, and talk about design more broadly, and some of the things that you've seen and you're seeing. I'd be interested, how you have seen design generally change over your career. You mentioned the agency work that you did for 15 years. The work that you're doing now with a design tool at Play. What have you seen change in the industry over your career? And then where do you see things going into the future?
I think one of the things, we saw over the past decade, more, maybe 15 years, certainly, is the role of design. Like what we'd say, I'll use some like jargon now, but like, capital D design, if you will, being valued at the C-suite level, right? It's not just pretty pictures. Like design, like good design is good business. And without it, you will be left behind by your competition, right? And so I think the overall value of design inside of organizations, especially as it relates to the digital space, which is obviously everything now, has changed in a good way. Whereas like early on, like in my career, sometimes you'd need to sell in the value of the thing that you were creating. Whereas I think then we went through, kind of probably a bit of a bubble where it's just like, oh wow, yeah, let's go and spend X amount of dollars on like a Flash microsite and spend a bunch of money on banner ads. And maybe that worked for a specific campaign, right? But sort of the advent of like, oh, maybe less TV spots and more digital stuff, right? So I think just the overall appreciation of design and how it relates to business fundamentals has changed over the last couple of decades for the better. I then think because of that, we probably have a lot of roles in the design space that get created that are almost like micro disciplines unto themselves. And so it just begs the question of like, well, what is a product designer? What does a person who has that role do? And the answer is right now, it's probably different based on the type of organization that they're working for, which I think is okay. But we certainly need to re-examine all of this with the advent of, things like AI, things like, the current economy and market that we're living in. Like I don't know how long, I don't know how many organizations will have the luxury of paying an entire design systems team to like check the padding on buttons and cards. By the way, I'm not playing down that role or those designers, but I think we all know that as companies get bigger and when VC money is plenty, there's bloat. It's just the way that things happen, right? And then roles just get created to do a lot of shuffling of things. and then when things start to constrict as they are now, it's like, oh, yeah, we don't need that person or that group or that team. So it just forces us to, I think, re-examine what is the role of design inside of organizations and how does that remain critical? And then how do people in the design profession maybe find themselves within a pretty, what I think is going to be a pretty rapidly changing landscape for everybody.
It's definitely rapidly changing, like you said, and it'll be interesting to see, over the next little while with all of the changes happening. Obviously we've seen a number of things tighten recently. We've seen the almost exponential growth of AI and what the potential for that is unknown at this point. But how all of this really starts to influence product development, product design, all of these things going forward within companies, outside of companies, will be a fascinating thing to see over the next little while. As you've built teams, I'm interested in this because obviously, you were at Firstborn for a long time and you helped grow that. And then now as you're developing Play and kind of building the team and the group there, how have you approached creating teams and organizations now, and especially as we continue to be more and more remote? I'm interested in that from both the business side and the product design side. What have you seen as far as building productive teams and building productive remote teams?
Yeah, the remote team thing is a whole new animal, for everybody, certainly for us. I think because when we started Play, it was pre-COVID, right pre-COVID, which was sort of a fun time to start. It's like, quit your job, quit your big job, start a new company, start raising capital, and then like global pandemic. It's like, oh wow, this is going to be interesting. I think so. For building a new team, what are the shared? You can call them values, I guess, if you want, but what are the shared values of that team and of that organization? I forget who it was. Somebody said like a culture is defined by like what behavior leadership tolerates. Some version of that. I forget who said it, and they said it better. Like I've made so many mistakes with like building teams and hiring people and so over the years. And I think that now, and maybe it's like my age or just that resonates with me because it's that then sets the standard of what leadership is okay with. And so whatever it is, I think in the beginning, you have the luxury of defining what those things are. Like, hey, like if the expectation is everyone works 7 days a week, and when you're interviewing people, you're like, hey, we work 7 days a week. We don't take any days off, which we don't, by the way. And I don't think that's a good idea. I'm just using it as an example. Then you know what you're signing up for. I think so. That's the main thing is like everyone in the beginning needs to know what they're signing up for. That means that every organization is not for everyone, and that's okay. It shouldn't be. And so if your job as a leader is to kind of like set the tone, but also say like, hey, this is what we're all about, And so when you come work here, this is what you're signing up for. And if that doesn't work for you, that's okay. But I want to be upfront with you about what we expect. And so there's no surprises down the road. And I think that's the most important thing, because then like the weirdest thing is like, because it's not good for anyone, right? It's not good for the company, but it's even worse for the individual, because they're like, oh my God, like what did I join? The interview process seems so different. And now it's like so different here. Like that should never, that's a fault of leadership. It's a fault of the company, And so I think, like one of the questions I'll ask people when we interview them is like, hey, like they'll talk to a few people, a few rounds, and they'll talk to multiple people. But I always ask people, is like, is there anyone else, that you'd want to talk with? And depending on how many people they've spoken with, and depending on what the role is, if they don't say like, yeah, I want to talk to this person, that's almost like a yellow flag for me, because it's like, well, you actually never, you never spoke with someone in this, in this role, and you'd actually maybe be working tangentially. So I'd expect you to want to talk to somebody like that. So I guess the headline is on building teams is like, everyone's going to have their own style, their own leadership style. I think you need some degree of consensus from a leadership team around like what you're all about. And then you just need to be transparent with what those expectations are for other people and set the tone so they know what they're buying into. The remote piece is a challenge. We started hiring remotely, obviously, during COVID. So we've got about half of our team in New York. We have 4 people in Brazil. We have 1 person in Spain. We've got 4 people or so on the West Coast. So we're kind of all over the place. We fly everyone in once a year, at least, which is awesome. We did that last year. We actually did it the year before. Then we flew everyone in last year from all over the world. For some people, it was their first time in the United States. Pretty cool kind of experience, I think, for them, but also for me and for just kind of like, it's just like, wow. It's just like, it was just a moment where I was like, this is, like I was born here. Like I was born an hour outside of New York City, and this is just normal life. And it's just a reminder of like, the world is a big place and people have come from so many different parts of the world, and they have so many different things to bring. And you get that when you're working remotely, but man, you get everyone in the same room. It just changes it for the better, And so we try to do that at least once a year. And, bring people that are in the States, they want to fly in whenever they want. They come in, we'll fly in and we'll do working sessions and that kind of thing. So I think mixing that sort of remote work with in-person work is going to be important. I think as you scale, it gets way harder. For us, it's manageable right now, like I still interview every single, like we all interview every single person we hire, as we should, I don't know how you do it when you're 1,000 person company, 500 person company, and now you're global. That's got to be harder, and different challenges. But we don't need to think about that yet. So I'm not.
Yeah, one day, right?
Yeah,
be a challenge to be facing. What advice would you have for somebody looking to get started in a product design career, or even starting their own company like you're doing now? What have been some of the things that you've learned throughout your career that you either wish you knew or would give advice to somebody?
Oh man, I don't know. I think more people need to start companies, but most people shouldn't start companies. That's kind of my advice. Just because it's really hard and you have to be a little crazy. Like you have to be a little crazy to just start something on your own, especially when it's really ambitious. But when you have a great team, the only reason I decided to do Play it's just all about my co-founders and the team. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be, there's no way I would be doing this. There's no question in my mind. So for me, it's always about the team and like working with people that are better than you, that, I have my skill sets, but they're brilliant in their own ways. And we kind of all are able to bring our talents to the table, and we know one another now, or we know what we suck at and we know what we're good at. And we don't try to like, pretend what we're good. It's just like, yeah, I'm terrible at that. You go and do that thing. And, but more people need to start companies because there are so many problems that we have and so much brain power, but it's also really hard, so most people shouldn't, because they will probably quit before they get to that moment, and sometimes you have to quit because like when you quit something, you can start something else. Right. But you should never quit just because something's hard. That would be my advice, is like quit things because they aren't working, but you really validate that they're not working. Don't ever quit something just because it's hard. Like those are the moments where you need to push through. Quit when it's a bad idea or it's not working and you've really validated that, but don't ever quit because it's hard. And then for designers or anything, I think we've and this is, I think, one of the risks of remote work. We've lost, I think, to a degree, the importance of like learning, like the idea of learning, like we go to school and we're learning. I don't know. Like, I don't know what I learned. I don't know. Like all of my learning was like post college, if I'm being honest with myself. And I sometimes feel like maybe younger people, I'm going to sound like the old guy now, but like maybe younger people, like especially people that have been told, that are really smart and that have been told for most of their young career in school how like amazing they are. And then they get out of school and they get in their first design crit, and maybe like the creative director, the design director is a really nice guy or really nice gal, but they're just being really direct. And like that person's like, oh my God, like they're just, their world shatters because someone told them that their design wasn't amazing. Well, it's like, hey, yeah, you're 20. And so it probably isn't going to be amazing because you still have a lot to learn. So like my advice is like, you got a lot to learn, and like the best thing you can do is like feel like you're getting paid to get an education. And so if you're in your first or second job and you feel like you're not learning, you need to leave immediately. Like I don't care how much money you're making. I mean, unless you have different life circumstances, I'm saying like if you have the luxury to choose a job and you're not learning and you don't have somebody there that you're like, oh my God, I really want to learn from that person. You need to go and find that opportunity, because that's where, and try different things. It's really hard to make terrible decisions in your 20s as it relates to your job. I mean, it's really easy to make terrible decisions in your 20s, but I'm going to leave this job, I'm going to go to this job. I don't know, like you should feel like you're learning and be around people that are really smart. Like if you look around, you're 22, 23, and you're like, I think I'm kind of one of the more talented people in this room. You need to get the hell out of there, like fast.
That is one of my favorite things, and agree 100% that especially early in your career as a designer, or really as anyone, like treat it as a continuation of your education, because your first few jobs should be just that. Like you are there to produce, but you're also there to just really learn. And that is probably one of the most important things you're doing. Like take the roles that you're going to learn the most in and grow the most in, because they will be the most valuable going forward. And you don't need to find that last, the place that you're going to be forever, or, the most prestigious or anything like that. Like find the places that you can learn the most, grow the most, get the most feedback, the most education that you can, and treat it like that. Treat it like you are there to learn, and, do as much as you can, but learn as much as you can, because you're not going to be there forever, most likely. And you will learn an incredible amount as you start in your career, and nobody's going to hold that against you early in your career. We all feel like they will, or feel like you have to come out of college knowing everything. I know I did, like looking back, nobody expects that. Like you're a new college grad, like you were literally the most junior person there, most likely. Just own that and learn as much as you can. So I love that advice. Well, Dan, this has been an amazing conversation. I know we're kind of getting towards the end, and I usually have a couple of wrap-up questions for everybody. But before we do that, is there anything that you would like to add to anything that we talked about or didn't get a chance to talk about?
No, I think we covered a lot. I think anyone, especially that's young and that has an idea, and you have great teammates, and you have an idea to build something, you should go and try and build it. We need more people building companies, solving important problems. So try it, and it will lead you on a path where you can always go and get a job. You can always go and get a job. It's hard, maybe that's not true, but that's what I tell myself. So, I would encourage people to start something and pick a problem. There's a lot of them and a lot of important ones. And, spend less time scrolling through TikTok and all that shit, and just like find people that are really talented that balance you and build something great, and I think we need more people doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Well, I have kind of two wrap-up questions that we like to ask everyone. And this can be about anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be business or design or product related, but have you read or watched anything interesting that you'd like to share?
I am reading. So there's a doctor that I've been following for a few years, Dr. Peter Attia, and he just came out with his first book, and is probably his last book, as he would say. It's called Outlive. His whole focus is like health, but like with a bend towards longevity. And so I love his material. His podcast is great. He has really interesting people on his podcast. Anyone interested in either, health or fitness, or even people not interested in health and fitness, but maybe should be interested in health and fitness, more so health, fitness is a component, but his book it's called Outlive. I'm reading it now. It's awesome. I'm really enjoying it. So yeah, that's kind of on my current, I try to read stuff that's not directly applicable to like what I'm doing in the day to day, because it helps. I think for my brain anyway, it just helps like expand my thinking and problem solving and stuff like that. So
yeah, absolutely. Awesome. And then are there any products that you are enjoying right now, or not enjoying? You can call those out too. And that could be digital products or physical products, anything that you've been using that has been particularly good or bad.
I mean, I love the huddle feature on Slack, but I hate the new like ringtone that they just added. Like that, I like it, but I want it to stop. So I like it because I want to know when somebody is calling me to a huddle, but I don't need to hear that damn ringing like nonstop. Just like ring it for, I don't know, 8 seconds and then stop it. So I love the huddle feature though, man. It's crazy. Like the huddle feature is like one of the best little software features of any product, I think, in the last, like, I don't know, many, many years. We use it like every day, 5 million times. So
yeah, definitely the huddle feature is great. I have had that where it's sounding and I don't know what it is. Like this was probably when we weren't using it as much. I'm like, what keeps sounding? And it's that huddle. It's the call to the huddle that's just like going on and on and on. Anyway, well, Dan, this has been a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed all of your insight. Where can people find out more about you, about Play, about the things that you're working on?
Yeah. So go to createwithplay.com, our website. You can download the Play app for iOS and iPad in the App Store. Links are on our website, or you can just go to the App Store and search for Create with Play. And you can also, we're going to be updating our website. You'll find information on how you can join the beta for our macOS product. And you can also look for us on Twitter. Again, our handle is Create with Play. I am not on any social media other than LinkedIn, which helps keep my sanity. But you can probably dig up and find me somewhere on LinkedIn.
Okay, awesome. Well, we'll put those links in the show notes so you can check out Create with Play at the various places and try that out. Well, Dan, again, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for all of your insight. Really, really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks, man. Likewise. Thanks for having me on.
All right. And thank you everyone for listening. We will talk again next time. Thanks again for listening. If you like the show, be sure to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. You can follow the show on TikTok at prodigy.co and on Twitter at prodigyco. You can also follow me on both of those platforms at Kyle Larry Evans. If you want more product conversation, check out my newsletter Prodigy at prodigy.co. You can also follow me on Medium at Kyle Larry Evans, or check out my Medium publication Prodigy. Of course, you can check out all these links in the show notes.